Tampa Bay is allegedly the original Garden of Eden. It is the original Atlantis, the inner seaport of Atlantis in Plato's description, or Solon's description of Atlantis. You have the outer seaport, which would be the Atlantic coast of Florida that sees the seas and the rest of the world. Then you have the inner port that was connected by canals and rivers, and that is in the Gulf. Now, when you look at Italy coming down and you see the islands beneath it, you almost get an exact picture of Florida coming down into the Gulf of Mexico, the Straits of Florida, with Cuba and stuff below it. So basically the story goes that before the flood, Florida was the belly button of the earth, meaning there's a North Pole, there's a South Pole, and the belly button is this center point where it was the perfect place to live. Now, the Garden of Eden comes from the story of Hesperides, the Greek myth of Persephone going down into the underworld. So we see the underworld connection is the Garden of Eden, which here we have one of the most influential men in America, went down to Lakeland, Florida. This Bok is probably the same Bok as the Bokstroms from Europe. He's Dutch. They came over to America. He knew these stories. So Tarpon Springs, Florida has like a huge Greek population. Why did the Greek move there? Because of the sponge fishing. Well, what if they were like salmon returning to their spawning ground unknowingly? So the Greeks moved to Tarpon Springs and established the Tarpon Springs community.
Welcome to the Juan on Juan podcast with your host, Juan Ayala.
We're hot here. Hopefully everything sounds good. So we're reporting from the Dancing Elephant. And here we are with Professor Longo and Dr. Longo, a regular of the show already.
Right.
Welcome. I don't even know what camera to look at. Welcome to another episode of the Juan on Podcast. What are we going to get into today? Because I'm really excited to get to digging at the book shelves to see what you guys got. Because there's a lot of interesting stuff here.
We could do that towards the end too, is go over a couple books.
Like a recommended reading list?
Maybe, but more just tie some, like we have the Florida, we have the Bok book right here, Edward Bok. But I think
which is really interesting. I didn't know that because I've been there.
Yeah.
And remember the whole thing that we were talking about was how these magicians, if you will, or whatever you want to call them, individuals that dabble in the art of, I think it's all about manipulation of energy and of actual people, because ideas, thoughts, everything we put out is energy. And we know that according to the laws of thermodynamics, energy cannot be created nor destroyed. It can only be transformed, right? Is that? Mm-hmm. Hopefully I'm saying that right. Transferred, right?
Right.
But then they add by ordinary means. So there's like a gray area, and there's like by ordinary means. So what are the unordinary? What are the extraordinary means? You know what I mean?
Bok Tower is the...
Well, the whole thing with that is, with the cathedrals and the bells, I have a friend of mine who has he's talking to a lady friend in Mexico.
Right.
She lives in Mexico. And the town has this church, and they ring the bell every 2.5 hours. Okay? And she says that it's very annoying, but the energy in that town is chill. Everybody's good.
Yeah, Palm Beach, the town of Palm Beach on the island, they have church bells too that ring, I believe, every hour, 2 hours. Yeah.
The way I see it is using sound and frequency to literally, and what I was telling you earlier about the way that, because I'm focusing on the way that the light comes in here, the way that light played a role in these cathedrals with the stained glass, I believe that it was some sort of way to initiate a hallucination of some sort, because the whole thing with Fulcanelli and the cathedrals is that it was alchemical text within, right, how this guy's telling a story with the Bok Tower. The whole thing with that was, it was for the lower class of people, like a picture book. You go in there and you read about the creation myth and all this stuff, and you're reading about it. And I think at the same time what they did is they used these stained glass and the sound and all this resonance in there to give people a divine experience. So that way they believed more in a God, and they were able to control. I think that religion is something that's used to control the masses.
Yeah.
I think it's a good tool if you use it correctly. Really, I was born and raised Pentecostal Christian, but then you start to see the greed and all that stuff. But for somebody who needs guidance in their life, who's some sort of NPC, if you will, they need some guidelines in order to live life, then sure, use religion. Because at the end of the day, it's don't be a piece of shit.
Mm-hmm.
What are the 10 commandments? Don't be a piece of shit, bro. Don't kill your neighbor. Don't, fuck his wife, all this stuff, Be a good person. So I think religion serves its purpose to a certain extent. But it is a brokered experience. But let's get into this whole Bok Tower thing, which I've been there, and now that you're telling me that he's trying to encapsulate the macro of the Garden of Eden into a little Garden of Eden.
Well, to touch on what you were saying about, I don't think it was always control. I think it was an art form, and it was a spiritual experience, a valid one. And the stained glass windows, some people say, oh, were those original? Were those just cast afterwards to sort of obscure what they were for? Now, a lot of them, especially like Sacred Heart churches or some of the Jesuit churches, they'll have these stained glass mandalas over the front door. Now, what that is you have, your astral body connected by a tether, right? Well, many people believe it hovers above your head. This would be the eighth chakra, so to speak. Our square doors clip that and prevent it from passing through into a building. So these were kind of like dream catchers.
That's the way you forget things when you walk into a room.
Kind of, yeah. Mm-hmm. You'd walk in, and the door was magnificent, but the door for your soul, for your oversoul, was even grander and even
it at
better.
The door, yeah.
So those are still in a lot of the churches, and I think they had a hard time finding a way to use those for bad, because people always still have that magnificent experience of walking into a cathedral. Mm-hmm. And the stained glass was used to manipulate people's emotions or their mood. Well, we know that. We have books on that right over here. Color therapy, color, our bathroom's green.
You've seen that thing that they use in people's eyes to induce almost a DMT-like experience?
Yeah, the glasses.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's also the theory by Rupert Sheldrake. He's a friend of Terence McKenna. He believes that early baptisms were a drowning that induced a religious experience.
A near-death experience.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
That they would just hold you there and drown you.
Just enough. I was actually listening to that on the way here. The Knights Templar, I think, had something like that similar, but they used a poison where that's the whole symbolic thing with the 3 days, where you're out for 3 days and then he resurrects. Well, it was an initiation, and what it was, they would put you right at the brink of death. To where you would, it's got to do with the plasma and the frequencies and all that stuff. And right when you're at the edge, right there before you're ready to go, they pull you right back out.
Yeah, it's a DMT trip. It's natural DMT. DMT is produced in the body most at birth and at death. And the in-betweens, when you think you're going to die and time slows down, that is the dream state. That's,
so like lucid dreaming and all that stuff.
Because you're being squeezed out of the material, and for a moment of time you're lapsing into this dream state where you see your whole life in a moment.
Back to this archways, right? These portals, right? Because they call them portals and all this stuff. That my buddy talks about, shout out to homie Romy, he talks about how crowns were used as some sort of energetic device to, and I believe it's at one of the Flagler hotels, the stained glass that they have. I think it's the one in St. Augustine, one in Jacksonville. One the art guy that made those stained glass, they had sent him over to Europe or some crazy place to train in the arts of the stained glass. And somebody brought it up on a podcast we did, how I think it's Olive Garden sends their chefs over to train somewhere over there, where again it's magic the way that they're doing it. And maybe perhaps you're right, maybe it's not for control.
Where are the breadsticks coming from? We don't know.
It's
How
from
can
Saturn.
they be unlimited?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And all this
Energy
stuff.
can only be.
Right.
Imagine they're
creating.
in the kitchen just warping antimatter into fucking breadsticks.
Yeah.
Well,
and they're
that's
giving it to you.
no. So the guild of the Olive Garden goes back to
Yeah.
the. But I want to the crowns. This is an important thing too. This will help explain how the chakras are the planets, how stuff like that. Astrology is your body, and a king is a king because of his crown, like you were saying. Crown comes from corona. Corona, Latin, comes from the Greek Kronos. Kronos is the Greek name for the planet Saturn and the god Saturn. He's also Seth, Joseph from the Bible. He's all these people. God of death. He's the stepfather, the motherfucker. It's like Joseph.
He's literally fucking your mom.
Yeah, that's why motherfucker is such an insult, because you're saying someone's Saturnian. You're saying someone's satanic. Satan is Saturn. Joseph is Satan. Joseph is Satan.
Yikes.
So, but we're getting to the crown.
Can you repeat that again? That's like really heretical. I want to hear it again.
Joseph, Father Joseph of Jesus, is the same archetype as Saturn, who is Satan. Does that mean he's evil? No, but he's a punisher. He did not have the same good nature that Jesus and Mary did. He was a doubter, so to speak. But
yeah, because he doubted that she.
Yeah,
because the
exactly.
first thing you're gonna think, Immaculate Conception. The fuck are you on?
But the crown. So Jesus wore a crown of thorns.
Mm-hmm.
He did not wear it on top of his head. He wore it across the band of his forehead, like you see the elves doing in Lord of the Rings, or like you see the Hindi on the Hindu people. So that is because a true king, a good king, wears his crown over his third eye, because he is a king under the spirit of Jupiter, who is Jesus, who is all good, all pure. My favorite quote about astrology is, if Jupiter was the only planet in the sky, everyone would live forever and there'd be peace forever. But he's not the only planet in the sky. There's also the other ones that add,
It's a galactic battle of energies and light.
So what happens is you had this usurping of the material world by Saturn. Because Saturn and Jupiter are the creator. Who's the creator? Well, it's right in the word. Kronos and his wife, Rhea. They are space and time. Kronos is space. His wife, Rhea, is area, who is space. You have time and area, so time and space. Kronos and Rhea, his wife. Look it up. And then you have Tor. Tor is Jupiter, or Thor, Thursday, the third eye. So the creator of the universe is and this is the same in the Bible. It's a agreement between Jupiter and Saturn. Saturn rules the space and the time, the constrictions of this realm, whereas Jupiter animates everything and brings goodness and life into it.
He's the creator, yeah.
But it's still Saturn's world. That's why he's the Lord of this world. Anytime you hear the word Lord in the Bible, they're referring to Saturn. Anytime you see the word Jesus, they're referring to Jupiter. So the Old Testament is a Saturnian document.
Oh, okay, I got you.
Which is where it's all Lord this, Lord that. Punish them, kill them, go rape those people.
It's an alchemical text.
It's allegorical.
Mm-hmm.
It's transcendental. It's a literary document, not a literal.
So from your point of view, what purpose does it serve then? Why give it to the people? Why did King James go, you know what, let's battle Geneva and all this stuff?
So the King James was the first time that the Bible was translated out of Latin, made available for the common people. The only person that did it before him was Martin Luther, and that started a war and a schism, a division between the two churches.
The 95 Thesis, was it?
Now, eventually the Lutherans got brought back under the fold, and it was kind of a proxy, war. It was more, it all came back to the Pope's control. But the Church of England, Queen Elizabeth I was a good queen, a very good queen. She was not evil. She was not a Satanist. The Pope's a Satanist.
Yeah.
So, and the Pope put out a hit on Queen Elizabeth. Well, that tells you all you need to know right there. She was going against the system. She brought about a renaissance of astrology.
She was
tarot
the fairy
reading.
queen, wasn't she?
Yeah, kind of. Hermeticism. And she actually was the virgin queen. That's what she's known as. But why? Because she didn't want to have children? No. She couldn't have children. That's what people think. But she also had lovers, so she wasn't against having children like that. It was the fact that she knew she was descended from an evil bloodline. And she chose to end the bloodline. She was a Tudor.
Yeah.
She was a Tudor. And the Tudor line pretty much ended with her. She decided that...
But wasn't she a stepsister of Mary Tudor? Or half-sister, I think
I think she was the daughter of Mary Tudor, the one that was executed. Was that Jane? Was that... I don't know all their names.
Yeah, we're not British.
Yeah, it was
But,
Bloody Mary, and then I could have swore Elizabeth was her half-sister. I mean, I could be getting this wrong.
I know that Henry the Eighth
The eighth. Mm-hmm.
impregnated Elizabeth's mom
Mm-hmm.
and then executed her. And Elizabeth grew up in seclusion and just happened to become queen by some technicality later on. But I don't know that story very well.
We're not going to get lost in the technicalities.
But she brought about this renaissance. And under her patronage, John Dee began his work.
Shout out to John
Now,
D.
John Dee, obviously, he was the first guy to go out and dabble with all this demonology and stuff. So it wasn't the Catholic interpretation that we have today, where everything that's an entity that you can't see is evil. He wasn't that naive. He knew that there was good entities out there. He knew that there was stuff to be done. Did he get used and manipulated a little by these angels? Well, yeah, he was naive in that sense. But he started the work that Francis Bacon would take on and complete, which was basically the number one. William Shakespeare is Francis Bacon.
Mm-hmm.
Number two, Francis Bacon was the final editor of the King James Version Bible. And they were released in the same year, if I'm not mistaken, the complete works of Shakespeare. Because remember, up until the time that his complete works were released, he was pretty obscure.
Mm-hmm.
And you wouldn't have known about him in other countries. As soon as they released his complete works, it took off, and he became a household name. And that's the same year, if I'm not mistaken. That's the King James Version Bible.
Yeah. And I've also heard about the idea of William Shakespeare having those missing years of his life and Francis Bacon, being in there. But I've heard the Garland brothers that traveled around with John Dee and Edward Kelly was actually the pseudonym for William Shakespeare.
Well,
and that's how he knew about the occult, and he wrote about, all these Faustian like Marlowe with all these plays, and that's how he was trained in the arts, because he was at these seances that John Dee and Edward Kelly were having.
Yeah. I mean, was Francis Bacon the only Shakespeare? Probably not.
No.
It was also De Vere, Edward De Vere, I believe his name.
Yeah, De Vere, yeah.
As well as John Dee. John Dee probably put in motion most of what they ended up with all the plays. He was a chronologer for the Crown,
Was that thunder?
What was that?
I don't know. It sounded like thunder, but
Somebody's car, maybe. I don't know.
Jesus.
That was a UFO landing.
Probably, bro. We're doing some stuff here. You got the chandelier that looks like a Dyson sphere there.
That was weird.
We did, yeah. We're actually trying to take that chandelier down.
We're having a nice
Came
one.
with the old place, and we have our great-grandmother's crystal chandelier that we plan on putting up
nice. Yeah, I really like it. I mean, I feel smarter being in here.
That's fun.
Around all these books.
We have at least one person a day, as they're walking out, just look at me and say, I feel so stupid. Like, there's so much to know, and I don't know any of it.
What was I just telling you before your brother got here? That I wish there was a way where you could read all these books without actually having to read it. And Manly P. Hall.
Download them. Yeah.
Yeah, Manly P. Hall back then was talking about how he would sleep next to a book and download the
Mhm.
information.
Yeah.
What if,
Yeah.
bro, and I know you're anti-transhumanism and all this stuff, but what if our boy Elon Musk comes on and is like,
Oh.
hey, with the Neuralink, all you got to do is just pop this USB drive in your ass and you got all the books you want, bro. Instantly, just boom, right there in your mind. Would you do it?
Sounds Faustian.
Uploaded.
Uploaded,
Not downloaded.
What's the cat?
That you're going to be part of the hive mind.
Yeah.
Well, that's the thing is, I'm on my iPad all day. I don't have a phone because I don't want a phone, but I end up just staring at my iPad because I'm learning from it, or at least what I say is learning. But as much as it's a crutch, and this is like cliche, everyone should know this, technology has to be a crutch.
Mm-hmm.
Once you, glancing at your iPad to learn things is kind of like training wheels. What you're talking about is more of the act of learning is going to be replaced. The act of reading is going to be replaced. The eye coordination between going through the page and scanning the page.
There it goes again. I think that's thunder, bro.
That affects. That's not thunder.
Are they launching the rockets? Like we're so weird.
NASA is doing that, like the Apollo thing.
That's what I'm saying. Are they launching rockets? Because that's the only thing it could be. Yeah.
But I can't tell if it's just my headphones. If it.
Yeah. Let me check the radar. Oh yeah, it's about to rain actually. Yeah. Yeah, we're about to get it. That's fine though.
Yeah, well, it just sound. I think with the headphones on, it makes it sound
Yeah, 'cause
really.
it's coming through the
yeah.
through the mic. So what were we about? Because you're piquing my interest with this whole idea of replacing the learning process. Because me, for one, for example, there is a virtual mystery school, a virtual reality mystery school that I attend regularly, and the founder is a friend of mine. I've had him on the podcast, and that is a way of using technology for what I would consider self-improvement or betterment of yourself or whatever it is. It's not bad. Because there was a comment that I saw in one of your videos that were like, stop training the AI by going into VR. Shut the fuck up.
Well, okay, so here's the distinction. What is knowledge? If you're a serial killer and you know a million different ways to kill people, that's knowledge. So knowledge without virtue almost always leads to manipulation and evil. The problem is that you cannot instill virtue except by one's own, experience, by one's own ups and downs. Using technology to remove those ups and downs or those lapses of time where you would have to dedicate yourself is going to instill a very bad relationship with knowledge. Because like I said, knowledge without virtue is almost always evil. Dominators, controllers. The Illuminati's smart.
Mm-hmm.
The New World Order's smart. They're knowledgeable. They know their world history. We don't know shit. The only distinction is virtue. And you have to read something to even get close to that virtue. Some would say you can't even learn virtue from the book. That's philosophy. That's what they're arguing for thousands of years. Can you read and learn virtue? That's what they're trying to do so hard. So is learning
bad, bro?
No, not at all. But I think that you need to have those experiences, whether they're mystical or just low points in your life where you're able to absorb what they're trying to tell you, not just catalog all the methods of doing things and knowing everything and knowing names and dates. So reading a book like that, if you could read a book in a second, which probably we're not far off from, I don't think it's going to do any good.
Yeah, it'll probably just be words, like you're saying, just
Word
trivia knowledge filling your head. But you'd be worse off. Probably.
Yeah, mental illness. I think the more shit you have in your mind. No, honestly, and people always ask, well, how do I remember all the astrological stuff, or how do I remember because it's not material knowledge. It's not dense learning that you'd learn from a textbook in school. that information that you're learning from a textbook is dense, low vibrational, so to speak. You have to take that by the handful and cram it into your mind and your body in order to absorb it. Whereas you talk about these topics and it just flows. You don't have to remember anything. It's just a system of correspondences and harmonies, planetary in the case of astrology. But that's how most of the higher arts are, philosophy. You're not remembering things. And the best philosophers, like Apollonius of Tyana, right behind me, he didn't know shit. He didn't know anything.
That's him right there?
He was uneducated.
That's that bust?
I don't know, that's Apollo, but there's a book of Apollonius.
Oh.
He's right over here.
That was the guy that was like almost
Messiah.
like a Jesus figure, right?
Right.
Well, he was alive at the same time as Jesus. He traveled to the east, and there's records of him going to China, India, and learning all the things from these masters.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, we don't have any of that information with Jesus. We don't know where he learned anything. We don't know where. We have a couple myths.
Yeah, we have a few books on it because they believe from age 17 to age 30, there's no record of what Jesus was doing.
Mm-hmm.
So a bunch of these books, and it's common belief in India and Nepal and China and those areas that Jesus came over.
Right.
They could just be saying that to sort of assure themselves that they're on top or
Yeah.
whatever, but it is over there. They believe that Jesus went over there, learned from the great masters, and then came back.
Yeah, he was an initiate. He was an adept. I mean,
Mhm.
that's what I've heard that before, and I think Manly Hall talks about how he was a product of, I forgot what school, the Eleusinian Mysteries, I think it was.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was right. Yeah,
But then
he
who,
would have been right in the timeline where he could have went.
you know who helped establish the Eleusinian Mysteries?
Who?
Pythagoras.
Daddy Pythagoras. Yeah.
Oh,
So
yeah.
technically, Pythagoras would be
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah.
JC's daddy.
He also went to Delphi.
Mm-hmm.
Pythagoras, Pytha is the name of this, the energy, the serpent,
The
God.
Kundalini, whatever you want to
Exactly.
call it.
That's like the basically the mystical foundation of the goddess, the Oracle of Delphi, and his name either comes from that or his name inspired that.
Mm-hmm.
So
And that's why I had asked you, like, back to the whole learning thing, because we're talking about these great minds, and I asked you one time, like, how many books at a time do you read? Because I find myself reading like 5 books at a time, but the reason I do that is because usually we do podcast episodes on X subject, and we'll stick to that one subject for the entirety of the entire episode, and it's not free flow conversation like this. And I'll have to study the subject and research whatever it is, so I'll read X amount of books on the subject, if it's John D or whatever it may be, for X amount of time until I can write out a presentation. And not only write out a presentation, but also retain some of that information too, because it's not just about, how you said, cramming it all in. I like you ever read Francis Yates' The Art of Memory?
No.
Bro, I think you would love that book. But the whole idea of building a mind palace, right? The rhetoric. This is how people back then, this is how Manly P. Hall could sit there for 2 hours like this, literally, and talk about a subject.
Mhm.
And it was word for word. There was a time where he would hand out lecture notes, and his lecture was almost, you can't ever memorize it word for word, but you get super, super close.
that's like Lincoln. Lincoln could
All these guys were.
apparently speak for 6,
Yeah,
8 hours,
half a day.
unscripted, and
Yeah.
have the people in the audience
Captivated.
riveted. Not just like,
About what, though?
going back to get drinks and coming back. They were about what? Well, I don't know. Have you ever seen his quotes about giants?
No,
Yeah,
he
but-
was a giant.
He was like 6'6" or
Yeah.
6'4" at least, and he has that bone structure, like that Cro-Magnon bone structure,
And he has the top hat, like the big high hat.
Yeah.
was
Oh,
he
yeah,
having
yeah,
an
yeah.
elongated
Elongated
skull?
skull.
Well, he has this quote. I'm gonna
Oh,
read.
no.
I'm gonna read this quote. He has a giant quote. He literally addressed the nation.
Yeah, he
And-
said
and
America is like
he
the
said
land of
that
giants.
ancient race of giants that once inhabited these hills, something like that. Let me look it up.
I would believe it. I mean, if he was some sort of descendant from the Nephilim.
Well, I think
like
at that time they had, because this is like pre-Civil War. Civil War is really when evolution took full swing in the, the scientific community. Dinosaurs and evolution was like 1830s up until 1870s is when all this made it into the curriculum. Literally, but during the Civil War, they were teaching Earth is flat, God created humans 30,000 years ago. That was literally your school education.
My favorite version of the flat Earth is the Christian topography version. Have you seen that? It's built.
No.
It's modeled after the tabernacle,
No.
and the world is actually a big chest.
So
No way.
I have the quote right here. It's an excerpt from a larger speech. The eyes of that species of extinct giants, whose bones fill the mounds of America, have gazed on Niagara as ours do now. Abraham Lincoln, 1848.
What the fuck, bro? So he was the OG podcaster then. He was
Kinda.
talking he was the original Joe Rogan. He was talking for hours at a time. About what though, bro? Did they document what he was talking about?
I mean, it would mostly be like political.
Yeah, ethics, because he's a lawyer.
It's
also.
like filibusters,
Yeah.
right? Is that what we're talking about?
No, this is like the polar opposite of that. Like I said, his audience was, they loved every word. I think he would draw in like, thousands,
Well, that's
if
the
not
art
tens of thousands.
Of rhetoric. That's what these guys are trained in. They're trained
Well, it's also
in.
charisma.
Well, here's the thing. So, you ever read The Crowd by Gustave Le Bon?
No.
So he talks about prestige when it comes to the different hierarchies of society. And prestige is this metaphysical thing, almost like a charisma that these rulers emanate and they put out.
They do.
And when people are drawn to somebody, it's because of their prestige. And this prestige has a metaphysical effect on people and the way that they look at you and all this stuff. Almost again like I was doing an episode on werewolves, the Book of Werewolves by Sabine Baring Gould, and he talks about how some werewolves, they would either trick people into seeing what wasn't there. You would be a werewolf, but I see you right now as a Dr. Narco Longo, right? But behind that, you're probably a werewolf, but the way that you were manipulating energy around you, you were portraying a different, it's all about perspective at the end of the day. But this metaphysical thing goes back to this idea that there's this parasitic aspect to people when they are in groups. And that's how you see with all these riots and all these things going on, how people act a different way because it unlocks this primitive part of the brain. And again, it's a parasite. And I relate that to the whole simulation argument, how it is like a virus that infects people and affects reality. And I think that certain people are able to tap into that. Al-Kindi, which was a famous mathematician, philosopher, Arabic back in the years 800 or something like that. He talked about, he inspired John Dee. He talked about how everything was light, right? Everything is a ray of light. I put out light, it interacts with your light, and it's an alchemical process. Now, the magicians, the people who can manipulate that light, are the ones that can manipulate reality.
Yeah, I don't know. The former owner of the store is a Hungarian metaphysicist, and his master was a guy named Peter Dunov, but he went by Bensa Duno. He's Bulgarian. He's pretty famous. He looks like Saruman from Lord of the Rings, or like Jesus. Looks exactly like him if you look him up. And he, in his book, The Master Speaks, had an interesting part. It's like almost a whole chapter on light. And he said that a lot of the Eastern religions have it wrong. They think, oh, my body's a prison. This world is bad. I need to escape up. I need to get out of here. It's ascetic. They hate themselves. They punish their bodies. They fast. They hurt themselves.
What are the ones that self-flagellate? What is it called? Flagellation?
Flagellation.
Flagellation.
Right. With a G.
What are they called? They have a name, the group.
Self-flagellators.
No, but the Da Vinci Code.
I don't remember.
Yeah, I don't remember what their sect is called. But he just thought that was so wrong, so off. Because like you said, everything is light. And to him, he thought that if you skip the material world, which is where light is. To him, light is physical. It is a material. It's what is illuminating everything. Then you're skipping the whole point. You know, what's the point if you have to at least master the physical first and then move on to the mental or philosophical.
And ascetic is acidic.
Right.
It's anti-life. It's life is bad. It's almost Catholicism. The Eastern traditions also play on your guilt. They just want you
100%.
feeling guilty, and it even goes past the Christian guilt, because the Christian guilt is, oh, you've done bad things that you've never told anyone about, and God's gonna judge you for them at the end. Whereas the Eastern guilt is like just existing is evil and sin.
And in your past lives, you did bad stuff, and you don't even know about it.
It's a suffering. Yeah, it's the eternal recurrence. That's the whole Ouroboros and all this shit.
No, it's another trick. And as Westerners, we need to realize that stuff wasn't made for us. It was made for Easterners who have their own perspective, their own bloodlines, their own genetics, their own nuance, linguistic nuance, and all this stuff. We have valid systems of illumination, enlightenment here in the West. Whether it's, Egypt is the West. Whether it's, Hermetic traditions.
Is there
the
music
Greek,
playing, bro?
It's across the street. It's always going to be playing.
It's like a bar for pirates and fishermen.
Whether it's the what was I talking about?
About the methods of illumination. Sorry.
Right. So we have perfectly good spiritual, methods, transcendental methods, schools here in the West. Whether it's, Native American, not so much, but whether it's European magic, ceremonial magic, whether it's tropical astrology, which was founded in the West, which is a
tropical astrology.
Tropical astrology, which is the true and only correct astrology.
It's like astrology with like a little palm tree. Is that why it's tropical?
Well, it's tropical because it understands geocentrism, whereas sidereal astrology is an attempt to rewrite astrology onto the new false.
And by sidereal, you mean about the other
planetary
planets.
system?
Yeah.
Yes, where it's trying to rectify the fact that we are just another rock floating around, and thus we have to adjust for the ages. There's no such thing as ages in sidereal astrology. Basically, Aries is March 21st, the spring equinox. It's when they blow the ram's horn. They also blow it at the end, which is Libra. And Easter is the spring equinox. It used to be. And today, it's the closest full moon after Easter, which is astrological.
Isn't Easter modeled after a fertility?
It's modeled after a lot of stuff. It's kind of a accumulation.
They also swapped the Jesus story. They put his death at his birth and his birth at his death.
But that was a Hellenistic thing, though, right? The switching of the death and the birth date is because they believed that life started at death, where this was how you're saying a trial. So that's a Hellenistic thing where they were swapping. Because people would be like, what the fuck? This guy died before he was born, and it's because of that. Because they had a belief that, dude, I believe Socrates, when he's drinking the poison, or he's like, why are you guys mourning after me? I'm going home. You know what I mean? It's this life after death, which But here's the thing. Well, Christianity's a death cult because what do? We prepare for the afterlife. The whole entire time you're too focused on pleasing the hierarchy and this metaphysical omnipotent thing in the sky, whatever it is, androgynous, I don't care, whatever. But the whole thing that you're preparing for the afterlife, you're too worried like, I can't do this X thing that's bad because then I'm not going to go to heaven. You know what I mean? So they instill fear within you since I was 12 years old reading the book Revelations, reading about how my grandma would tell me that they would have to cut my head off.
They're going to have burning swords, like flaming swords.
She's like, they're going to cut your head off if you're not part of the rapture. There's going to be 7 years, and the Antichrist is going to rule. It's going to be great the first 3. And then after that, the hell and all this stuff, the locust and all this. I was 12 years old, bro, reading about this stuff.
Yeah, they instill. And that's another thing. You started that off with Hellenic. Well, we can sort of tie this into the Bok saga. And I didn't title my video Bok saga because you might have to bleep this out. Bok saga is one of the most censored things on the internet.
Really?
And I mean that. One of the most. They stabbed him twice. He was killed by a stabbing.
Oh, really? The old guy, the
Bok, yeah, the last Bok family member of the Bokstrom line. And we should probably cut that out. But it's
I'll
okay.
write it down. 3835.
But just say Finnish mythology. Okay. Because it is a keyword that's... Yeah.
Okay, keep talking.
But whatever. So, Hellenist, that's another thing, is scaring people into religion. Hell used to be freezing cold. And light was the good. Light was good. Whereas in the New Testament and the new false Christianity, Lucifer, the light bearer, is evil. And Lucifer rules the rainbow. He rules... That it says this in the Bible. Lucifer is the rainbow. He's the sapphire. He's a sapphire. Well, what
Sounds
does
like
that
a good guy to me.
Well, let me explain. Lucifer is Libra. He's the planet Venus. Lucifer is the planet Venus. But he's also Libra, because that is where the sun sets. And Libra is ruled by the two evil gods of Christianity. Saturn, who's the Lord and the Punisher and, Satan. And then Venus, who is Lucifer, who is the tempter, because Venus has to do with desires and delights and
Right, we were
material.
just saying that the material world, that light is manifested.
So Yahweh is the Saturn.
Well, Yahweh is... Okay, so there's many interpretations on the Yahweh thing. Yahweh is probably Jupiter, if I had to guess. And why is that? Because Jehovah is Jupiter. From Jehovah, you get Hobe, or Hova. From Hova or Hobi, because B and V swap, you get Job from the Bible. You also get Jove, the Roman name for a man Mediterranean. It wasn't just Roman, the Roman name for Jupiter. So right there you have Jehovah means Jupiter. Just like here in Jupiter, you have the Hobi Indians. Hobe Sound.
Hobe Sound, Florida.
It's the same thing, Hobe. That was Hobe. So when they came here, they said, "Oh, Hobe. That's Jupiter." So they named it Jupiter, right north of there. So south or whatever. But then St. Petersburg, same story. St. Petersburg is Jupiter. Peter was the first pope. Why? Because Jesus is also Zeus. And I understand this is confusing. Oh, well, if he's that planet, then how is he that planet? It's all about singularity. If you go to Egyptian mythology, you'll see all the gods have Ra at the end.
Amun Ra.
Like Amun Ra.
Yeah.
Horus Ra. Well, why is that? It's because, to an extent, all the planets do get their light from the sun. Is it the model that we're given? No, but it's the same light that is a gift from the sun that comes...
But if you're a flat earther, I thought space was fake, bro.
Well, what does fake mean? Does it mean...
I've heard I've talked to Mark Sargent, and I've talked to David
Oh my
Weiss.
God, he's the worst of the worst.
They're saying it's a holographic projection.
Is that the guy that did the Netflix
Yeah,
documentary with?
he's like the human potato
Yeah.
that, lives in his mom's basement.
Yeah.
And he's, scratch that guy off the list of... He's not even... He's disinfo.
Well, Ken Wheeler says he does a lot of stuff with Santos Bonacci, and he says just by principle that space is not real. It's not a thing because it has no properties. So how can it be a thing which has nothing? You see what I'm saying? It's kind of semantic, but he sort of proves it with like logical proofs and things like that.
The sun is the most unobstructed. All the planets and the stars are pinholes. Little pinholes poked in. Some people say, oh, the firmament. I don't really care whether it's solid or not. I'm never going to go up there. I'm never going to know. It doesn't matter. But the same way that you cannot dig down, you dig down, and you hit a density that's so dense that nothing can penetrate it, and that's happened dozens of times.
What's the furthest they've dug? 7 miles? 8 miles?
Yes, it's like 7 miles. And the drills break. The diamond drills that are harder than anything. So as you see a tree, the branches go up. Equally, the roots go down and spread down. That's my model of the universe. That's all I need. Now, we have the luminaries up above. The luminaries are, you have fire and air up in the air. That's why whenever you say God, it's a masculine God, and you always point to the sky. Well, that's God, the Father. That is a masculine God, because he is the causal realm. He is where all causes come from, whether it's the astrology, the stars, or just acts of heaven. The material world and matter is mother. Matter is mutter, madre. It's all the same word, all different cultures. Water is matter. So when God says, I separated the waters from the waters, he's not talking about water. He's talking about matter. Liquid was just another word, another way of saying matter.
Did you see the astronaut that they had to seal a leak because he was leaking water into his suit?
What?
Right, yeah.
That's why I say the
Right,
water is above.
Mm-hmm. Well, there is.
As above, so below.
Well, I mean, I think in that instance, he was underwater in NASA's
Was he?
fake. Yes.
He's in a pool.
That
yeah.
he was in there. They have a giant underwater. They
Mhm.
test all their shuttles underwater in this big giant pool.
I
So
saw,
he was probably
I saw
there.
my buddy. He posted it. I didn't read the whole thing. I'll be honest, but maybe it was in a pool somewhere, and that's how they said they shot the moon landings too, in a pool.
Yeah. Well, NASA, I was saying this the other day, that NASA is Florida history.
Mm-hmm.
You know, people forget that when they talk about Florida, that almost all of it was coming out of Florida, still is coming out of Florida, including even like SpaceX and stuff they're launching.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and the Starlink satellites, you can see those from Florida.
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty trippy stuff.
And the same thing with oh God, what's his name? Glenn Curtis, the guy who did the guy that made Opa Locka.
Okay.
So South Florida is number one. It's where Amelia Earhart
Mm-hmm.
took off.
Yeah.
Earhart took
Did
off.
really?
Took off from. She took off from Opa Locka, Florida, which is this
Wow.
old marsh.
Oh,
So
boy.
Glenn Curtis came down
Opa
here.
Locka.
Don't get me started on
Yeah.
Opa Locka,
What?
man.
There's so much.
So
Yeah, let's talk some Florida.
in Opa Locka, you have Glenn Curtis. This isn't one of my videos.
After this, let's talk about the Bok Tower.
Okay. So Glenn Curtis, did you know that the first ever airboat, like the ones used in Florida, was invented by Alexander Graham Bell?
Really?
So
He had like hundreds of patents. He
he's like
invented
he's like the definition. He's the poster child of inheritors, where these predestined
World Fair types.
Yeah, World Fair type, exactly. So he
Like a World Fair was like a garage. It was like, look at all this shit that I found.
Yeah.
here. And
it was, and that's how Tesla got into the mix. But whatever, they
I have my own
all
theories
tie
of
in
Tesla,
together.
Yeah.
So, Bell basically went from, phones and radio and receiving audio from a distance, stuff like that, phone lines, and of course Bell telephone. We went to summer camp on land it was once owned by the Bell Telephone Company. So they're like, tycoons, that family.
Mm-hmm.
All because of this fraudulent invention where he literally, not only did someone invent it 20 years before him, he found out someone was going to put the patent in at the same day and sent his lawyer there first and probably strong-armed the guy out of placing the patent, because they both placed the patent in the same office on the same day, and they went with Bell. So Bell, he had his own share of like controversy, so he kind of needed to go to the back, go backstage for a little. So he enlisted Glenn Curtis, who was just a bike mechanic, literally just a bike mechanic, a bike guy who he had also worked at Kodak photography,
Mm-hmm.
and with no experience whatsoever, within like 2 weeks of being there, invented 2 revolutionary methods of like photography and photo,
lenses and things
stuff
like
like that.
Yeah.
With no experience. He was literally like a bike mechanic. Now John Saxer is a bike mechanic. We're going to be getting to him too. But
Like when you say bike, you mean motorcycle, right?
no, well, that's the thing. He's credited with helping invent the motorcycle. Basically, he was taking V8 engines and slapping them onto bikes.
I've always said this. I've always, when I'm riding around on my motorcycle, I go, I am literally riding around on something that some guy woke up one day and was like, I really like this motor. I want to fucking ride it.
Mm-hmm.
So he put 2 wheels on it and he's riding it around.
What I think the angle is though is that Glenn Curtis and Bell were not innovators. They were merely
Emulators.
like money changers almost, middlemen, where they take this grand old free invention and find a way to tax it, to make it profitable, to make it chargeable. So everything Curtis invented ran off of a gas engine. At first,
and this
all
is the
of
guy
those things.
of Opa Locka.
That's the guy that later in life went down to Opa Locka when he was like.
And he founded it.
He founded it and he built it from the ground for no reason.
Hundreds of buildings,
like
and Moorish architecture with like spires and.
And he was just about finished, and then a hurricane came and destroyed all of it except for 30 buildings, but 3 main buildings. His private mansion, the Opa Locka City Hall, which is the magnificent one with the spires that you see, and something else.
Like the Great Jacksonville Fire?
Kind of. Well, yeah, I think he orchestrated the whole thing, and hurricanes are the perfect storm, so to speak, to go in and knock stuff down. But Curtis, he got hired by Bell to start doing planes, and he was a direct competitor with the Wright brothers.
Wow.
With Bell's backing.
What year are we talking about here? What year is this?
Like 1912. I don't know. He came down to Florida and.
But long story short, he had a lot of different inventions in like aeronautics and things. Mm-hmm. But then he had a huge scandal with the Smithsonian that's in one of his videos, where he tried to petition the Smithsonian and say, hey, we have a few of these airplanes that are already in a museum as being the world's first airplanes. The Wright brothers are credited by the Smithsonian with being the first ones to ever fly. But I have proof that it wasn't them. It was actually that plane over there. And I forget the guys' names, but he said, I know I have proof that one was capable of flying because it was an earlier plane. It's in the museum. It just wasn't, ready.
The Wright brothers are the controlled opposition. They're the poster child.
And what he did.
Well, no, it's the other way around, but kind of.
He said, I'm going to show you because that plane can fly. And they're like, no, that plane can't fly. It's like an early prototype, basically.
Yeah.
The Wright brothers were the first ones to fly. And he said, no, I'll fly it. And they're like, okay, like if you can fly the plane, then clearly it was the first one to ever fly. Because it's functional. Mm-hmm. And what he did is he took the plane, he took the motor out, put in his own motor, which works, so now it's a working plane, and flew the plane.
And he edited more than just the motor. He literally changed it around.
And for like 25 years, I forgot who built that plane, but he basically got them credit as being the first to fly.
It was a member of the Smithsonian.
Yeah, it was like part of history until like the 50s when they realized that it was all a
so they hijacked
fraud.
it?
So he hired Glenn Curtis. It was like a president or vice president at the Smithsonian, a high up guy. He either invented this plane or had helped. He was friends with the builder. And he hired Glenn Curtis to under the table to alter this whole plane, make it flyable, and to discredit the Wright brothers. And this fraud passed for years.
Yeah, the Smithsonian had them credited as the first in flight for quite a while.
So the Wright brothers, were they controlled op? Like in the grand scheme of things, like were we flying before? Probably. Did they invent flying? No. But did they get shafted out of their original feat? Yes, by Glenn Curtis and the Smithsonian.
Wow.
And this is like the Smithsonian's, and it's not their first, and it's
directly altering history on purpose. Not like, oh, we're so innocent, we didn't know. It's like, hey, like go fix up the plane and fly it, and we'll tell them that was the first plane,
So
I didn't know about this.
And that's all factual. That is like
real.
A real scandal.
That's
it's
no
not
conspiracy theory.
There's no.
But right after that, where the conspiracy theory starts is right after that. Glenn Curtis was this famed, like Da Vinci almost style, like Evel Knievel mixed with Leonardo da Vinci. Like he invented, with Bell, he helped invent the first airboat here in Florida with a propeller on the back. But his main call to fame was he was one of the last airship mechanics in the world. He was one of the last master airship Zeppelin. What do they call him? What's the third name? What's the other one? Digital, rigidal,
I don't know.
dirigible.
Never heard of that before.
Well, that's what they call them. Dirigible or something like that.
Dorian.
But airships. The airships were all powered by steam and unknown electric means.
Unknown electric means.
Up until Curtis started slapping V8 engines on them.
Motors on them.
Motors, gas motors.
So it went from free energy,
Exactly.
ethereal to...
And that is why...
Standard Oil.
So his
Rockefeller.
story is insane. Each one of his innovations branches off into these grand conspiracies. Yeah. So, number one, he did that with the Smithsonian. Number two, he did, what was I just saying? The airships were a completely, logical form of transportation. It wasn't until they had gas engines slapped onto them
that it was ridiculous.
That it became ridiculous. Oh, they have to land and get filled up with gas.
Oh, yeah.
Up until that, if they were just getting charged with static electricity from the tops of these buildings, like the Empire State Building, they could just float forever.
What's that famous video, I think, where the one's coming down and crashing and blowing up and
the
on
Hindenburg,
fire?
yeah.
The Hindenburg landed in Opa Locka, too.
Oh, my God. Oh, I've got another Opa Locka. Is Crestview. It's a little off topic.
Okay, well, hang on. We're going to get to that, too, because that matters.
What does Opa Locka mean? Is that an indigenous name?
I don't know, but I don't know. I should know.
It seems like this is a key figure and a key place.
I mean, it looks to me like etymologically like high ram abiff, high ram above. Manly P Hall. It's like his big dick.
Opa Locka?
I think it's open and locking the door. Opening and locking.
Wait, what are you talking about? Manly P. What?
Like Masons and these secret societies.
What did you say about Big Dick and Manly P. Hall? What are you talking about?
It might have been a fake name, like
William
Shakespeare.
100%.
Which means manly.
Bro, HP.
Aleister Crowley.
HP Harry Potter. Harry Potter, Helena Blavatsky, HP Blavatsky. Mm-hmm. All these guys. It's a mantle, bro. It's a magical mantle.
But I think, those were like some stretches.
And you refer to Manly P. Hall as Daddy Manly P. Hall from here on, right?
Well, he is Manly. Think about it, Manly P. Hall.
Well, they say that he was a hermaphrodite.
Oh boy,
well, maybe
I hadn't heard that one.
I know that he knew everything he knew when he was about 20, 25 years old.
He was the pastor of his church
Los
when
Angeles.
He was like 16 or 18 or something.
Absolutely, at 18 years old. Let's continue with this Opa Locka shit. Then we can talk about Manly P. Hall.
Gotta get this out. Glenn Curtis. And the story, okay. It means wooded hummock.
Homunculus?
Hummock. With a U.
Wooded hammock.
Yeah, but it's also supposedly a abbreviation of Opa Tisha Waka Laka.
Yeah, so it is indigenous.
But it's
what
interesting.
Does that mean,
it's interesting that he chose the Opa and the Laka.
Yeah.
Because that sounds like magical talk to me.
Exactly.
Like abracadabra, Opa.
Abramelon.
You're like open and locking the door. You open the door and then you lock it. So it could be.
Was he part of Scroll and Key by any chance?
I've seen Alexander Graham Bell was for sure.
Scroll and Key.
Well, they were Shmish Masons, so to speak.
Schmegma, I don't know what that is.
Shmish Masons. They're Freemasons.
Tartarian
truthers. Shout out Tartarian truthers. But Opa Locka, Glenn Curtis, was the understudy of Bell. His kind of his henchman, the guy that would do all his dirty work and do the inventing for Bell's ideas a lot of the time. And Bell was paying for a lot of this shit. As soon as he had that scandal, I think he stopped getting money and had to, I'll do anything. And they sent him down to Florida. And what did he do? He opened an airfield. He got straight to work on the airships. There was airships. The most airships in Florida were in Opa Locka. That was the airship. And in fact, actually, the plant system, how Plant had his trains and stuff. The plant system of steamboats, trains, it was also the third piece was airships. And they had these train stations, and they were called line stations. It was called like air to sea lines. And basically, you could steamboat into Florida, catch a train, and catch an airship all in a day for like one ticket on the plant system. So he was steam plant. Yeah, these steamboats. They don't have boats going up the inland rivers of Florida anymore because they're too heavy.
Henry
too
Plant,
dirty.
HP.
That too, yeah. So, whatever. But back to Opa Locka. Airships, which in themselves are Tartarian old world, this mystery. Why'd they pop up? Why'd they go away so soon? Well, I think they were always here. And Glenn Curtis had a big role with, sealing their fate as being, these laughable, stupid machines that humanity was so foolish for trying out. But here, let me make the next big connection. Glenn Curtis was the first man ever, supposedly, one of the first man ever, probably the first, to drop a bomb from an airplane. He was doing demonstrations for the military, and they were using planes for reconnaissance.
Mm-hmm.
He was the first person, allegedly, to say, "Hey, give me a bunch of bombs. I'll go up there and show." And he demonstrated for the generals, dropping bombs out of the plane. As soon as he did that, aerial combat becomes a thing.
Mm-hmm.
And every single fort on the planet becomes obsolete. That is why forts stopped getting built after World War I.
You can't sit still. You just get airstrikes,
So up until Glenn Curtis, star forts were still, all over the place.
Yeah.
Kind of. I mean, they had the rifled cannon. They say that the rifled cannon made them obsolete. But what made all forts of every type obsolete was Glenn Curtis dropping a bomb from an airplane.
Who is a Florida man.
That's
the most Florida man shit
yeah,
you can.
right.
Let's take these bombs again. Yeah. Let's take this motor. I want to ride this motor. Slap some wheels on it. The motorcycle. Let's take these bombs. You want to fly with them? Yeah, sure, dude. Can we drop them from the airplane? Will they blow up if we drop them from the airplane? That's some Florida man shit right there, bro.
Yeah, he might not have even been a bad person. Like, he may have just been one of these cronies, henchmen that is talented, but he's being manipulated and using all his talents for the wrong reasons, which was primarily getting all of these innovative new methods of transport onto the gas motor system.
Rockefeller.
The internal combustion engine, which has had no innovation over the last 100 years.
Yeah.
And we paid just as much for it as we did then.
And the guys who come up with the water-powered engines, they commit suicide with 2 shots to the back of the head.
And that was Plant. Plant was the last person to be using the steam engines. He had the last steam engines in Florida. That was in my tree video, too. It's interesting how the last steam engine in Florida was being used to haul the largest bald cypress trees in Florida. Why? Because the coal engines were too weak and too small. The steam engine was insanely powerful. It could pull like a 4-mile train full of thousands and thousands of pounds of.
What about ethanol? What do you think about alcohol?
So ethanol that's why Prohibition happened, because it was never about drinking it. The presidents kept drinking.
Yeah.
The wives.
Rockefeller. He's a teetotaler. John D. Rockefeller did not drink alcohol whatsoever, and he put tons of money behind the teetotaling movement, the temperance movement, and.
So wait.
So it was on the principle of not drinking, but also underneath it was affecting his business.
Yeah.
Because there's that quote by Henry Ford says ethanol is the Model T could take ethanol and gas. I don't know if you knew that.
Yeah.
No, I didn't.
Yeah.
You can take vegetable oil.
The OG hybrid.
Yeah.
It was the OG hybrid.
Fermented vegetable oil. You can literally take store-bought.
Which is a problem because anyone can make their own
gas.
Which is, it's all about taking
and diesel
power away.
Yeah. So then Prohibition, it's illegal for a decade, and by then gas was so part of, everything of the infrastructure and it's impossible to go back,
The guy that invented the diesel engine said something very similar to that. He said, with minor additions, the diesel engine could be ran off of vegetable oils, fats of all types,
There's people who do it.
alcohols of every type, and then even the last, he said, water.
Yeah.
With minor additions.
They can make alcohol
which
in
is
jail,
ethanol.
so anyone can make alcohol.
Which is
yeah.
ethanol.
Yeah.
So that's why, a lot of these kids that drive like Suzukis and stuff, they run their cars off of vegetable oil.
Mm-hmm.
It's not the same like clean vegetable oil that I'm saying ideally the world should be going off of, but it's easy. It's not, rocket science.
Yeah.
It's combustive fuel going in. So if we're going to be
Rockefeller science.
So Rockefeller, yeah, and they both retired. Ford, Rockefeller, Edison, Plant, Flagler, they all retired to Florida and put their hands in Florida history and rewrote our history.
Yeah, but my whole thing is why Florida though?
Because it's okay. So that takes us to kind of the Bok.
Yeah.
We'll tie it into the Bok book, and my last video was Tampa Bay.
So what was the guy's name? Curtis. What Curtis?
Glenn Curtis is
Glenn
the Opa
Curtis.
Locka guy who designed the Moorish
Yeah,
city.
go look up pictures. It's crazy. Or he's got a
Well,
video.
we
on it.
can slap them on over,
Mm-hmm.
like edit one or two,
Actually, LaGuardia Airport in New York City was called Glenn Curtis Airport for a long time.
I didn't know
Yeah.
that. That's
He,
What was
he
his
was that
full
big
name?
of a deal.
Glenn Curtis. What is it? Glenn something Curtis.
Glenn Curtis. This is what really got me on to Glenn Curtis. I was looking up Opa Locka, Florida, and it said Glenn Curtis, the father of Opa Locka, Florida, and it had him as the 5th most influential man in American history.
I remember I sent you a bunch of stuff on
this
it.
list of most influential men.
Which that's not even a household down there.
And nobody even hears
Exactly.
about him.
It's literally like Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Edison, and Bell probably, and then
And that one
Glenn
even
Curtis.
then is so.
Yeah.
Exactly. And then Glenn Curtis. And I was like, who the fuck is Glenn Curtis?
They changed the name of the airport. I've never heard of him until 6 months ago. And
Wow.
He did so much stuff.
yeah, his
Like I said,
Wikipedia is
the
so
airboat, within a year of being in Florida, he had the airboat design pretty much finalized.
long. And he died in court, didn't he?
He died of like
Mysteriously.
a mysterious, he just died suddenly in court of like either a heart attack or
Yeah.
they said it was like a gallbladder infection or
That's
He's
what
just
happens
like,
when you
oh,
sell your
pen-
soul.
yeah.
Yeah.
appendicitis or something.
Just
Oh.
keeled over. And
But yeah. Okay, so back to the what's his name? We have Bok. Who's the other guy? Okay, John Saxer.
Okay. Which is
Tam-
also a
Tampa-
bike mechanic.
Yeah, who's also a bike mechanic and is descended from a royal line. He's descended from the Merovingians of antiquity, of ancient Europe, and he comes from the Sax family. Well, the Sax family is the Saxers, the Saxons. They're the
Anglo-Saxon.
That's Anglo-Saxon because the royal families of Germany took over England, or the Germanic peoples, Danish and stuff like that, took over England. And today you know that the royal family changed their name in World War I because they were fighting the Germans, and
he was too German.
their name,
Yeah.
the royal family was literally Saxe Gothenburg. Saxe Goth. Saxon Goth.
Mm-hmm.
So that was their last name, the Queen's royal family. The Queen, she was alive. I don't know. When was she born? I don't know. But during that time, the
1930
last
something.
king before her, his last name was Saxe Gothberg.
Well, they're lizards, so. that
Well, they
means
are. Yeah, I mean, they are. to
Our
an
friend
extent.
John would be a lizard too, then.
No. This is what I'm saying. This royal blood of the evil people. This is what people need to get over. Not all the ancient royals were evil. Not all the magicians were evil. What does evil mean? You go to Afghanistan, you find the people we're fighting against. Do we think they're evil over here? Yeah. If you went and you spent a day with them,
They're freedom fighters.
you'd say they're freedom fighters. Well, there might be a piece of shit here, a piece of shit there. Are they the best people on the planet? No. But to cast any group of people as just evil automatically is foolish. So, and it's okay to approach it like that because you don't understand it. and you might have, hostility from an ethical point of view, or whether you disagree with certain things. But to say that a whole group of people is evil because they practice something we don't understand is very naive.
It's fucking
foolish.
racist, you could say.
It is racist, even if it's not race. But but basically, they had what was I talking about?
So the
Saxon,
name,
yeah.
the
The
name
Saxons.
of the king.
Yeah. So the Merovingian line, just like this is what I'm getting at. He's a direct descendant of Saint Bernard de Clairvaux.
I don't know what it is.
He's the founder of the Knights Templar.
Oh shit!
So that's why the Swiss flag is the Templar cross.
Is that the guy that died in his sleep, like burning alive? Lightning hit him. No, that was the
Well,
guy
no,
that
no, they
prosecuted
they
the
burned-
Knights Templar.
I don't think he was alive.
The guy that
by the end.
prosecuted the
He
Knights
was-
Templars,
yeah.
that he died in his sleep.
Wow.
He got struck by lightning,
Right.
like burned to death or something like that.
So the Knights Templar are super interesting, and it ties into this too because Bok is descended from some of the same families.
So let's get this out of the way, because
Yeah.
I've talked about the Knights Templar before. What's up with Baphomet, bro? What do you got to say about that? Was that just a sect of the Templars or what?
So, number one, magic is a system of planetary correspondences. So they worship Jesus. Is anyone angry at them for worshiping Jesus? The Templars? No.
No.
They're angry because they worshipped someone other than Jesus as well.
Mm-hmm.
They also worshipped the Black Madonna, who is Venus. The goddess Venus. She's black. Why? Well, Saturn is black, but she is black because she's the earth. She's the fertile earth.
Soil, yeah.
Soil. She's dark. She's dark and moist like the earth. Whereas God in the sky, he's fire and air. You can't look at him or it'll burn your eyes out. So you see that, So Saturn is the goat.
Mm-hmm.
Saturn rules Capricorn, which is when the sun dies or he's born, so to speak, because, like you said, winter. And that we were getting to that earlier too with hell. Hell used to be a cold place. Well, Santa is Saturn.
It's like Helsinki, right?
Who's
That's where you're
Satan.
going?
Exactly. So hell used to be a cold place. Can you tell me the name of hell in Spanish?
Invierno, yeah. We
Can you
talked
ta-
about
can
it.
you- Oh, we already went
Yeah, on
over
my
it.
show, yeah.
Sorry, but and winter is just one letter off, and you could make the argument that it's the same word exactly. So you had this cross where hell became hot, but it used to be cold. Why? Because Saturn is Satan, and Satan rules the winter. His glory time is Capricorn, which is the dead of winter, when the sun is at its weakest. That's also when we start our business year, because it's all about Capricorn's all about business and work and sacrifice and punishment. So we're on the punishment system. We should be celebrating our new year on the spring equinox on Easter, but instead we have been duped into a purely business corporate existence where you're born and you celebrate your year. Your year renews in the month of business. Therefore, it's like your birth chart. Every year is a business year.
Yeah.
Whereas before you had the spring equinox was the spiritual, rebirth, fertility, all the good stuff. It was all good. Now we celebrate our year in the day of the times of death, where everything's cold and, blah, blah, blah. Baphomet, to tie it back into Baphomet. Baphomet is Saturn. So it is evil to worship Saturn as the supreme god. Jupiter is the supreme god. He should be. That's his rightful throne. He should be. All the good faiths of the world recognize Jupiter as the primary god, the king of the gods, the king of kings. Jupiter is the king of kings. Sorry, Jesus is the king of kings. Jupiter is the god of gods. So they both have their 12 followers.
So is it like the Father, the Son, and
Well,
who's the
it
Holy
is
Spirit?
because, like we said, it's Jupiter and Saturn, Father and Son.
So who's the Holy Spirit?
It's the feminine. It's the Venus that has been removed. Because, well, what you're saying is right. You're right. That's the exact same correspondence. But Christianity was overtaken by the Saturnian death cult. What they did was they took out the feminine aspect,
Yeah.
which would be the Black Madonna. So the Templars' biggest heresy was that they re-implemented the goddess worship. So the Baphomet is scary, but the Baphomet was not their prime. The Baphomet was the one that they would take their oaths in front of, because you don't take an oath in front of Jesus. You take an oath in front of Saturn, because he's going to hold you to it. Jupiter is going to forgive you. If you give up on the oath the first day, Jesus is going to forgive you right away. So you say, you get what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Saturn is...
The Old Testament, he wasn't forgiving very much.
He that won't forgive you. So
Yeah.
if you want to make a oath,
You die, yeah.
you say it to Saturn, because he'll hold you to it. So they were committing their oath to Baphomet, which is this very Saturnian, rigid god. You say this, it's going to be done. Now,
And you have Venus in there too, because it's the black cube.
well, the
right?
part of Baphomet that makes him in between female and he's a hermaphrodite too is because they implement Mercury in there as well.
Mm.
Because Mercury was cast out, where in the Christian tradition you have the sun,
Mercury
the father.
is Hermes, by the way.
Mhm. Yeah, the messenger god, yeah.
Exactly.
Hermeticism.
That's why Hermeticism was so. So this is a re-implementation. The Templars, were they 100% good? No. They had three main roles: to recover sacred artifacts from the Holy Land, to design and implement Gothic architecture, which that art form has been lost. And you could make the argument they didn't build anything; they were just keeping it and preserving, inheriting. But their third was they were the banking caste.
Uh-huh.
They were the bankers of the Roman Catholic Empire. Now that's really where people start to have their.
Are they good guys or bad guys?
They started out as good guys. If you want me to put it plainly, they were good guys that were trying to counter the evil that the Pope was doing. And at first, the Pope was resistant. They had some strong backers that were also royal families, and they were the royal families kind of like Kennedy. Kennedy, JFK, is from a royal family. His family isn't the best. They don't have the best history.
That's why they died all.
He was, well, yeah. And Kennedy was hated by both sides, Republican and Democrat, when he was alive. It wasn't until 20 years after that he starts getting celebrated as this, messiah figure that saved America.
Because he was
He's a
trying to do
martyr,
what?
yeah.
The whole banking thing. There's a banking aspect in there too, where he was trying to cut off funding to who?
Mm-hmm.
Was it to Israel or somebody? I mean, I'm not 100% on it, but some Middle Eastern country.
So I think was it the invention of modern banking? Possibly. Were the Venetians doing banking before them and had their banking empire already spread throughout Southern Europe? Yes. So I think their biggest crime was bringing banking to Northern Europe, and the whole thing was, the real invention of banking was all these men were going off to the Holy Lands, and they were saying, hey, you're going to leave your family here all alone. All your stuff's going to be ripe for the taking. Someone can just take it. Leave it with us. Leave it with the Templars, the church. Donate it. You get it back when you come back, which you won't, because you're going to die in the Crusades.
Yeah,
you're going to die in the Crusades. And yeah, the Crusades. Some people were gone for 20 years. Some people were gone for... So they said, leave your money with us. We'll take care of it. You'll grow some interest on it. And that was the invention of banking. And they gave out the paper money. This was some of the first paper money
it's your receipt.
In America. It's your receipt.
They invented the
Europe, not America.
cash system.
Well, in a sense,
credit card
there was
system.
yes,
they were
credit
already in
like that, yeah.
They were in a feudal system as well, so life was pretty terrible.
So this, yes, we can condemn them for those things, but we only have our modern lens to look at that through, where banking is purely a control system. There may have been a time where it was a convenience, because back in the world, they don't have all this digital stuff. You had to haul your wealth around with you wherever you went, or someone could steal it. Or they could just kill you and take it right off you. So, it's the same argument they have today. Oh, it's going to be safer with us, and who knows? Where I like to view them in a good light is that they re-implemented a lot of this hermetic wisdom that the church was saying was evil. And what they ended up getting burned at the stake for doing was these old initiation rituals, these old hermetic...
Were the Knights Templar trying to bring back some sort of hermeticism? Were they trying to
revive
it?
Number one, everyone was pissed off because the Moors had taken the Holy Land and most of Europe, right? Right around that time, right before that time.
And they were
And
going,
around that,
and then they were going to take
they were still in Spain.
Constantinople.
Yes.
Mhm.
That's the Crusades that, because they had already had a schism between Eastern and Western Roman Empire, and the West had fallen into the Dark Ages, whereas in Constantinople and Byzantium, they were thriving. They still had Plato, they had all the Arab geometry, all the stuff was preserved, the golden buildings, everything was fantastic. Whereas in Western Europe, it was like you're like hoeing a peat field all day.
Throwing
Full
your,
of shit.
Yeah,
throwing
and, like,
your
eating
shit out the window
Yeah.
onto the street.
And so the Pope sent, and it was basically a jihad. He said, if you go and fight to protect Constantinople and Christendom from being taken over by, at that time it was like Mehmed the Conqueror was the one who finally took Constantinople. He said, if you die in battle, you'll be redeemed in heaven, And so everyone signed up. The first crusade, they thought they were going to have 30 battalions or something. They had 3,000. Everyone came. They're like, let's go. We're going to Israel.
Yeah.
And they got it.
Million-man army.
Yeah. They protected
A
Jerusalem.
million-man army?
At least, if not multiple millions.
Holy
Life
shit.
was so bad in the Middle Ages when the Pope said, you go protect the Holy Land and protect Constantinople, you'll be saved. Everyone was like, I'm in, One, it's like an adventure. And then two is, you can, no matter what you did in your life, you're saved. And they had so many people, too many people almost. They moved too slowly. You had to go all the way across Europe down into the Middle East.
Now, Charlemagne, who was repelling the Moors
Charlemagne the God,
most of his life. He was an Alan, a Goth, and those are the same people that the Knights Templar were. The Knights Templar were Alans and Goths. Now, a history lesson for those that don't know, and keep in mind all of this we're discussing is subject to the same resets that could have possibly been going on in the 1800s with evolution and the heliocentric
So
model.
even the story that we're having now.
So
could
even
be
the
obscure.
story could be, exactly. It could be the filtered version that's gone through 3 rewrites, if not 10. But regardless, that's the story we've been given. That's what we're going off of.
Does Flamenco talk about the Knights Templar?
I don't know. I'm not huge on flamenco. I don't know all this stuff. As soon as I heard that 1,000 years of history were folded on, that made things so clear for me.
And they even have that where the Catholic Church, didn't they skip 15 years or something?
So Germany and
Well, there was the Gregorian calendar. And
Yeah.
but in the switch over, they
got
had to
off.
adjust, and in that
They were
they ended up losing. I don't know off the top of my head, but it's
Yeah.
it's like 7 years or something, 15 years. It
That's-
just doesn't exist in
that's
a
another
timeline.
I know we're kind of bouncing around, but that's another thing that's very trippy about the Bible is, we had people living for thousands of years. Well, when you realize that may not have been a solar year.
Are people trying to come in?
No, it's okay.
Yeah,
If
I put a sign up there. So.
If you realize it could have been 1,000 lunar years, well, that would make you, maybe only 100 years old if you were 1,000 years old. And you had to divide that by 13. Divide that 1,000-year-old timeline by 13. You'd get like an 80-year-old man. 1,000 years old divided by 13, whatever.
Yeah.
You'd get an 80-year-old man. So that was like the timeline of biblical times. Then they switched over. And what was the switch over? Was it God's punishment to man to make him live less? Well, probably. Do we live as old as we did before? Probably not. But it was also the switch onto the fiscal year, the business year, which steals the divinity. It steals the framework of, yet obscures the divinity of the 12 segmented astrological zodiac. So that is the 12 months of the year. March should be the first month.
Should we have 360 days?
So that's
Because
another
the
thing.
Chinese have 360 days. It's a perfect circle,
Mhm.
which makes so much more sense.
Well, that's a solar year. What happened is that there's 360 degrees of horizon.
Mm-hmm.
That's 360 degrees.
Right.
The 364 days fit into that.
Mhm.
300. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So the value is like 364 to 360.
Yeah. Oops.
Where you get the perfect lunar year is, well, there's 13 months. There's 28 days in a month. 13 times 28 is 364.
Makes sense. You know what the Babylonians did?
What?
They had a 360-day year, and they had a 5-day purge. No laws. Well, seriously.
Yeah.
They had no laws. The king took off his robes. The queen took off her robes and lived amongst the people. It was a feast. You could kill people.
That's Saturnalia?
Do anything you want.
Kind of.
And on the 5th day, or I guess the first day of the new year, because it had to be a perfect circle, so they kicked out the 5 days, said do whatever you want, and then come back into order. So like from chaos back into order.
What's
And
that one saying? KO, something or other?
But the first day, the king and queen would like ascend the ziggurat, like the big pyramid, and they would have ritualistic sex and give birth to the new year in order.
Interesting.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah, it's like Saturn.
Yeah.
Saturday was Roman,
Yeah.
right? It was the Roman where it was the pseudo king,
Mm-hmm.
and you could do whatever. You give gifts. That's where we have the gift giving,
Right.
and the green and the red is symbolic of Saturn, isn't it? Like something
yes.
like that. Like
Yes.
that color, the gold, green, and red, something like that. I forgot. I've done an episode on it, but yeah, I didn't know about that. That's crazy though. That because the Babylonians were one of the first people to do astronomy essentially, because they on the top of their ziggurats they would look at the stars and stuff like that.
And Bok Tower has a huge sundial on the side of it. I don't know if you've been there, but it has a massive sundial, and it has astrological symbols all over it.
That's what I was looking at in that book, because when I went there, I didn't focus on the tower. I didn't focus on the because I didn't think anything of it.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like, oh, it's a nice looking tower.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like the
landscape.
The landscape.
You know, the Olmsted brothers did Bok Tower, so they're like the two brothers who basically invented landscape architecture. They did the White House. They did Central Park. Oh yeah. The
Really?
Olmsted brothers.
The
There's
castles,
two of them.
the castles in Central Park.
They did Central Park. They did the White House. They did, I think, Flagler's Mansion. They did everything.
Oh shit!
It's a who's who. Give them I didn't come prepared. I didn't do any research, but Olmsted brothers, they did all of it, and they did Bok Tower. So the same people who did landscape architecture of the White House did Bok Tower.
Dang.
Yeah, it's a big deal.
It is. It's called the Taj Mahal of America.
I could look it up if you want.
So we're looking at we can like overlay pictures. I'll take some pictures. The Edward Bok Taj Mahal of America, and it's written about Bok Tower Gardens in Lakeland, Florida. And there's some illustrations in here, but he has the creation story, the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve, etched onto this tower. The story of creation, serpent, Adam, Eve, all the biblical figures, and then he has...
And you're not allowed in the tower, by the way.
Right.
Yeah, why do they say that?
I don't know.
He doesn't want people going in. It's surrounded by a moat, too.
Yeah, I saw that. There's koi fish in there. I fed the koi.
Mm-hmm. But it's built on what at the time was believed to be the highest point in Florida. So he thought that he was on the tallest point in Florida.
Yeah.
Today they know that I guess there's like some hill or mountain up in North Florida that's actually taller. But he's in the peninsular Florida. He's on the highest point of peninsular Florida. So
I did the Capitol building too.
Capitol building?
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah,
And
so the south front of the Singing Tower with sundial at the base.
And the Biltmore in Asheville. Central Park, Congress Park.
So now Lakeland is not far from... it's not that far from Tampa. It's...
So the door represents the story of creation.
Right.
It was put in there by a Samuel Yellen, designed and hammered out in Rapus brass. I don't know how to say that. By Samuel Yellen. Wow, this is trippy, dude.
Oh, they did Flagler's Hotel too.
Oh, nice.
In St. Augustine.
Oh, well.
Yeah.
That's all you need to know.
And that was their first project, by the way.
Yeah,
I
right.
believe. Or no, that was the architect's first project.
Of course.
Yeah.
So this tower, right? Because I'm gonna have to go again. It's a little bit of a drive, but this tower, it's got the stained glass windows at the top of it. And one of the things that I was telling you about earlier, that relates to John D. and Edward Kelly, is that light played a big role in these buildings and this architecture, where it would, again, it's the manipulation of light. I mean, we talked about at the beginning where Edward Kelly, the whole thing with the crystal ball was the light that was coming into it, right? It was almost like a hologram. But the architecture plays a role into it because Edward Kelly his visions would become more powerful. Sometimes he would stand up and not look at the globe itself, the crystal ball. It would matter because of his surroundings at the time and the way that the light was coming in. And I'll show you the article. There's an article written about it. But I think that also plays 100% a big role into the whole thing.
Yeah.
The way that they're able to bend the light.
And that was Heidegger, the philosopher, had not a take on that in particular, but he was battling against dual.
And here we are after a quick recess. Can't even see me on this camera, but it's all good. You can see me over there. Here we are. So, I didn't mean to cut you off, bro.
You're all good.
You were saying something about the
churches, yeah. That Heidegger. So after the introduction of dualism, like the philosophy that there's you and your mind and the world and that they're separate, that was never a thing. I don't know if you know much. This is like philosophy.
It's like Cartesian philosophy.
Yeah, it's Cartesian.
Mm-hmm.
So René Descartes introduced the idea that there's his mind. And the reason that he did that is because he said, okay, if we need to come up with philosophy, we need a cornerstone to build upon. And the only thing which you can really know or prove the existence of is yourself. So that's why I think therefore I am. So he said, I can always prove myself, but I can't prove anything about the world or that it even exists. And so that created the schism. And ever since then, that had so many different effects from like materialism and scientism. But it even destroys the type of thing you're talking about, where the church is part of you, like that it can have a profound effect upon you. The architecture can mold you, and the light can, because if you're a monist, you think, well, the church is part of me, the light is part of me, you see, and we're one and the same, and it can really, my environment is just an extension of myself.
So this is phenomenology. It's the study of the experience being true to you. So I want to say some sort of gnosis or like a divine experience that only you can prove because it's happening to you. Right. So it goes back to this idea of being in these buildings and what we touched on earlier about architects being magicians. Architects need to predict the future. Well, that's divination. Because in 100 years, you got to make sure that this foundation is good and it's going to hold this building. So you're looking into the future. You're planning for the future. And these architects, they would, and I'm talking about from the Pythagorean point of view, where they would follow certain principles. And if you follow these proportions and ratios according to Pythagoras, which all is numbers, so all is a simulation essentially, because it's a binary code. That's my personal opinion. They would make these buildings according to Vitruvius talked about this, how certain rooms have certain effects on people's mentality, the way that the air is circulated. Certain rooms are only meant for certain things. So according to the Pythagorean principles, if you made this building to this ratio, you would encapsulate a higher dimension within the actual shell of the building. So how you're saying they're capturing people's auras when they're coming in through the door, they're chopping off that crown, chakra, whatever it is, because it's literally like almost like a mandala, where it's like a capsule for the soul in a way. And I think that's what they were doing. They were literally harvesting people's energies in these buildings. That also plays a role in it.
Well, that's the thing. Do you know how speakers work?
No.
And headphones?
No.
And earphones, and so
It's magic.
every speaker with a cone,
Mm-hmm.
speakers are cones. Microphones are also cones.
Mm-hmm.
A microphone is a speaker. They are the exact same
So
mechanism.
when you're talking to a speaker sometimes.
That's
like,
why if I play music, recording, a lot of these techniques, hidden techniques that only the engineers knows, you take a big speaker and use it as a microphone. And you can play a guitar into the speaker. And if you have, because instrument cables and speaker cables are double-sided.
Mm-hmm.
They are, one prod on one end is the same as the other. So that's why the first telephone looked like a speaker, because they were talking into this big like tuba thing, because the speaker, and that's what the old speakers were like a horn. So
it goes back to cymatics.
So you have to understand that you can use that to harvest people's energy and steal it and manipulate it, but that's not what they were originally designed for.
That's what the lizard people took it over to
They
do.
took it over and they flipped the use of the technology. So whereas they had, a PA system where they're in their room and they can send messages out from that one room, they flipped it to where now they own all the rooms. Therefore, they own the control room because they own each of these little spouts where this energy comes out of, whether it's the star forts or the cathedrals. So they have co-opted and hijacked the system. And you're right, they do use it to harvest. Like the Super Bowl is like a energy harvesting ceremony.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's the same thing. It's not inherently bad, though. It's being used for bad.
Mm-hmm.
But that thing with the mandala above the door, that's a good thing. Most buildings don't have that. So when you walk in, your oversoul is cut off and it has to stay outside the building. In the church with the cathedral, with the mandala over the doorway, is one of the only buildings where it's designed you bring your soul with you as you go into the world. That's the door for the soul. It's like the doggy door for your oversoul.
But then they fuck your soul when it's in there.
Not originally. It says
Not originally, but now they do.
Kind of, because they're pedophiles and they are, but they also don't know what they're doing.
That's crazy.
With a lot of this shit.
Bro.
So the organ.
So
is the same
did my
thing.
soul go through that little doggy door at the top there?
Well, I mean, yeah.
I sure hope so.
Yeah.
She probably put a
Yeah.
mondo up there.
It's
My
not-
soul's waiting for me outside.
It's
right
not a black and white thing. It's not every time you walk in a door your soul stays behind. But the correspondence needs to be understood. You're walking into a place of worship. You want to make sure you bring everything with you.
Mm-hmm.
You want to bring that oversoul. So those buildings are designed more for your oversoul, for your higher self, than you. You go in there, it's all stone, the lights affecting your eyes, and like you're saying, you do get this altered state of consciousness.
Because remember, it was uneducated people. It was the peasants that they were trying to get a hold of.
Well, that's later. So that's during like the fiefdom.
They don't understand what's
And-
happening. They go, "Wow, this is God."
But
So-
originally there was no peasants at one time. Now was that 150 years ago? Was that 1,500 years ago? I don't know. But the controllers, the corporate system is only a new recent 2,000-year-old thing. It's the age of Pisces.
Mm-hmm.
It's the fiscal year. The fiscal.
Fish. Cool.
Fis, Pisces, pescado, vesca, Pisces, vesca, fiscal. It's all the same root word. So fiscal is the financial world. We live in a purely fiscal calendar. And
Liquidity.
yeah, it's money. Pisces rules finance.
That's
high
why
finance.
it's the bulls and the bears.
Well, that's another astrological correspondence. But you have the banks of a river.
It's red and green.
You have liquidity. You have currency. Current. What else? There's so many others.
Yeah.
Currency.
But money is moony. It's water. It's materialized energy, which is what the moon does. That's why silver was the most common type of money, because gold is too scarce. It corresponds to the sun. Money is condensed. You're literally trying to materialize energy and saying you spent this much energy on something. I'm going to pay you for this. You know, you trade your corn, whatever you're doing, a service, a good. It's a placeholder. Well, the moon is the universal placeholder. The moon is like, it's what makes everything material occur and happen. As I was saying before, the sun is unobstructed light. It's a hole.
I heard somebody call it a portal today.
It is a portal because what's behind it's a pinhole. Because what's behind it is unobstructed divinity. It's God's face. That's the God from the Bible that you can't look at. Oh, it's so bright. That is the sun. That's why the sun has always been associated with God and the highest God, because that is God's highest creation. Why did he put a ball up in the sky? No. That's what God looks like all the time. And we only see him unfiltered through the sun. The moon is the most filtered manifestation of God. It is the most material thing in the sky. Does that mean you can go land on it? No, you can't. It's made of selenite. The moon's made of selenite.
Yeah, we talked about that.
Selenite, pearl, maybe moonstone, but it's made of selenite. And you can tell that because of the way that it glimmers, the way that it glows, the way that it almost looks translucent.
You don't have selenite on here?
No,
you have
we
have
have
that.
a bunch over there. Oh, the selenite ball. Yeah.
Here's the moon. This is the moon. Now, there's no craters, and I don't have an explanation for craters. Is it material? Probably. Can you land on it? No. I can promise you that. Now, the moon is the most obstructed face of God, with the most layers and the most density. So that's why when things come to this world, the moon is the last thing they pass through. Like the Ptolemaic world model, where the soul enters.
Well, Plato talked about how the Earth is the receiver of the souls, right? And the solar system has the soul has to descend through all the orbits of all the planets.
Yeah.
And
the shells.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, he talked about that.
So the sun is the first, being the least obstructed, and the moon is the most. So that's why masculine is the moon, and it's matter, it's material, because all material comes from the moon. Because the solar rays become dense and cool when they hit the moon, and they're cast back onto us as cooling and moistening, which are the feminine properties. The sun is nothing but hot and fire, air and fire. So you see that clear distinction. If the moon were purely reflecting the sun's light, it would also be hot and dry. It is not. Moonshade is colder. Moonlight increases condensation. So you get the idea. I forget what we were talking about, but let's try and tie it back into Mr. Bok. So the secret societies, they know all this stuff about astrology. They know that the gods in the sky aren't gods with beards that judge you. They know that they're planets. Now, behind that planet, is there a higher intelligence that can, have its own indistinguishable qualities? Perhaps. But the way they make themselves known to us is through the planets. The sun is responsible for everything, right? Life, radiation, electricity, magnetism. Everything comes from the sun. If the sun goes away for a day, everything dies. Everything falls apart. The sun keeps everything alive and in order. The moon, and science recognizes that. Oh, the sun, everything, all the plant life, everything. Well, the moon, we have the same, same role, where the moon rules magnetism. The moon rules the tides, the oceans, the water, the emotions. Oceans, emotions. The moon rules lunacy. On full moons, people go crazy, stuff like that. So that's where lunatic comes from. Well, they know all this stuff. They weave these little fairy tales out of those stories in the most materialist, foolish version, and they teach us those. And that's okay, because we have to earn our place at the table, right? So we have to learn this for ourselves. Well, people like Edward Bok, people like Flagler, They know a lot of this stuff. Does that mean they're good? No, they use the knowledge for bad, obviously, and self-preservation. It's like me versus everyone else. I don't care about you. Well,
literally, I mean, that's what it was. They were
Yeah.
cutthroat. They were businessmen.
In the same town as Bok Tower too, they have Spook Hill, which we've never been to. Do you know what Spook Hill is?
No.
Oh, it's like a.
Is that the one where the kids push your car up the hill or some shit like that?
Yeah, so it's like a hill.
I have a friend of mine who's been there, but I've never been there.
Yeah, it's the same city as Bok Tower.
Really?
And it's like this hill, so it dips all the way down and comes all the way back up. And they say that you can leave your car like in neutral all the way at the bottom, and it'll climb up.
Well, people put baby powder on their bumpers, and they said they can see
there's
that.
handprints.
Little hand, yeah.
I didn't know that. I didn't know that was so close.
It's the same town. It's like it's like 2 miles away.
Paranoid American, he's been there. He's one of my co-hosts, and he said that he's done that.
Yeah.
Nice.
Well, I don't think it was here. I think it was somewhere in California. There's a similar thing.
Really?
Yeah. Put it, yeah. So again, this has to do with where on the ley lines is that tower aligned? Have you checked?
So I've got a friend, John Carlo, that came in. We're going to be doing a video together. He's taken a lot of what I've been saying about Florida, and he's putting it into like calculation. He's going and he's checking all these ley lines, and he has found that almost all of these sites in Florida correspond to, if not ley lines, correspond to each other as far as lining up in a row. And something he told me was the original Coral Castle was on one of these lines.
He could, because he moved it the first.
But he moved it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, for him, it might have been a better spot. What if he was trying to get his building out of the grid, off their grid system, and he moved? He's like, I need to move this thing. That's a possibility. But this goes back to what you're saying about skeleton buildings, or I was using the word phantom. It's like phantom limb syndrome, where the masons and the architects believe that a building is not a building. It's a spiritual entity.
Mm-hmm.
It's a living entity. It just doesn't have a physical form. So the union between man and divine is the building, the erection, like the obelisk, like the phallus. It's all the penis.
It gets sexual.
The penis, yeah. It's the act of creation, the erection of a building out of stone. And you build it to inherit this phantom limb. I say like phantom limb syndrome, like there's a building, you have an arm, you get it cut off. Well, there's a phantom limb, a network
that's still there
of electromagnetic,
And they tap into that.
And they can tap into that, and this is the same thing as ley lines. Ley lines are just random points that are, cross sections of these intersection points of these lines. Well,
it's also called morphic resonance in plants.
Yeah.
It's the same sort of thing, that there's already a field there that's almost like a plant memory.
Mm-hmm.
Like the plants have specific shapes and forms that they grow into, and it's almost like, how do they know to stop there, to grow into this shape and not that shape? And there's a theory called morphic resonance that says that there already is a field there, that there is like a cosmic memory amongst plants of how to grow and when to stop growing and what shape to grow into, and that they just grow into the field that's already there, which is the same sort of thing. You're building the building that's already...
That's fucking crazy.
Yeah.
So that goes to show that time is cyclical, and they know this. They know that that building may have been there a million times before, gotten knocked down, built back up. That phantom limb, that electromagnetic, whatever, is still there and will always be there and has always been. So our role when you're given a body is to harmonize the physical world with that ethereal imprint. So they, as the good masons, the original ones, the good ones that were building this stuff, obviously we had people come in later that said, oh, yeah, I built that back in, but they didn't. So you have inheritors, you have theft and fraud and stuff like that. But I want to try and tie this back into Lakeland, Florida, and the Tampa Bay area. As I've been saying in the last two shows, Florida is ruled by Pisces.
Mm-hmm.
Pisces is fish, it's ocean, and you can say, oh, well, it's just in the ocean, right? Well, no. Florida was the last state of the continental United States admitted. Pisces is the last sign of the zodiac. the signing of Florida's state constitution or whatever it was in March. Not only that, Juan Ponce de Leon found Florida on Easter Sunday, which was right around that cusp of Pisces and Aries.
Let's not forget that Florida is shaped like a phallus too.
It's shaped like a phallus. It's also shaped like a fish, with Okeechobee being the eye of the fish. So I would like to see how your friend would tie this into tarot, but I know for a fact Florida is orientated.
I think Florida's the death card, bro.
To the sign. Well, that's okay.
Pisces
but why
is the moon card.
But why is Pisces? Sorry, why is Florida the death? I'll tell you. Pisces is the last sign of the zodiac.
Mm-hmm. The rebirth. Yeah.
Meaning that if Aries is birth, Pisces must be death. So Pisces is also ruled. I've been saying 3 planets, and I don't want to overcomplicate people. Pisces is a complicated sign. It's the last sign. Pisces and Scorpio have the most dimension to them because they're water, they're deep, they have such depth. So Saturn, sorry.
It's my girlfriend.
You're good.
Yeah. So Pisces is ruled by Neptune, of course, the god of the seas, Jupiter, Venus, and Pluto. Now, there is no Pluto city, which is why I haven't been saying it, but that's also an unseen planet, so you don't have to worry about that guy.
Mm-hmm.
We have Venus, Neptune, and Jupiter here in Florida. Are you going to find Venus, Neptune, and Jupiter in any other state in America?
We have Disney's Pluto.
Well, that too, but the Pluto comes into this story that I scratched the surface of in the Tampa Bay video. Tampa Bay is allegedly the original Garden of Eden. It is the original Atlantis, the inner seaport of Atlantis in Plato's description, or Solon's description of Atlantis. You have the outer seaport, which would be the Atlantic coast of Florida that sees the seas and the rest of the world. Then you have the inner port that was connected by canals and rivers, and that is in the inland. So not inland, but in the Gulf. Now, when you look at Italy coming down, and you see the islands beneath it, you almost get an exact picture of Florida coming down into the Gulf of Mexico, the Straits of Florida, with Cuba and stuff below it. So, basically, the story goes that after the flood, Florida was the belly button. Before the flood, Florida was the belly button of the Earth, meaning there's a North Pole, there's a South Pole, and the belly button is this center point where it was the perfect place to live. Now, the Garden of Eden comes from the story of Hesperides, the Greek myth of Persephone going down into the underworld. So we see the underworld connection is the Garden of Eden, which here we have one of the most influential men in America, went down to Lakeland, Florida.
I've never even fucking heard of this guy.
He was his magazine was kind of silly, Ladies' Home Journal or whatever, but he was an editor he wrote that, but he was an editor for many different publications. And that's obviously not officially that's how he made his money, but he's from one of these. You can see right here, I'm trying to tie it in dramatically, but on this illustration, you see the Merovingian fleur-de-lis, which is the symbol of the Merovingian bloodline, right here, hidden. You have the cross.
Uh-huh.
It looks like the Templar cross, or the Holy Cross. Then you have the fleur-de-lis. Now, the fleur-de-lis at one point was banned by the Pope, but they eventually went back on it. John Saxer uses that same symbol. And it's the Merovingian dynasty of blah, blah, blah. This Bok is probably the same Bok as the Bokstroms from Europe. He's Dutch. They came over to America. He knew these stories. So Tarpon Springs, Florida has like a huge Greek population. Why did the Greek move there? Because of the sponge fishing. Well, what if they were like salmon returning to their spawning ground unknowingly?
Mm-hmm.
So the Greeks moved to Tarpon Springs and established the Tarpon Springs community. Now, the 4 names of the rivers of Eden all translate back to Greek, not the Hebrew. Euphrates means dragon, for example, in Greek. So what you have is in the Tampa Bay area.
And this is inscribed into the tower.
Yes.
Because if you notice, it's always the alligator. It's like an alchemical painting.
Mm-hmm.
Where is it blowing? It's blowing towards Tampa.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have these things that are pointing places. You know what I mean?
Well, that's Zeus. That's Jupiter, blowing the air, god of the air, the sky. That's Poseidon or Neptune. Now, Neptune or Poseidon, Pisces, Poseidon. You see the correspondence. Mm-hmm. Neptune is.
Yeah, we'll put a picture of this up.
Neptune rules Pisces. And what I was trying to say, I think I said it in the last show, these sites of mounds, mound cities, and these old, crazy native sites that are just unexplained today, they're all plotted according to astrology. They're all plotted, and in Florida, it's all plotted to the sign of Pisces. So thousands of years ago, people knew that Florida has a correspondence to the sign Pisces. Today, the people that named this stuff and named Neptune Beach, Jupiter, Florida, they know this stuff too. So clearly they're drawing from the same bank, memory bank, information, secret, hidden teachings, whatever it is. They're both on the same wavelength. The people before knew it was Pisces. The people today know it is, the controllers. So, but I want to tie this back into John Saxer is the man from Tampa Bay that's been saying Tampa is the Garden of Eden. It's the port of Atlantis, the seaport of Atlantis. I think it's the deepest water port in Florida. I could be wrong. But that's where they had these giant arcs coming in, like Noah's Ark. These giant...
Well, that's why Flagler wanted to cut across the Everglades.
The canal, right.
He wanted to, and that's a whole other story, but he wanted to cut across so they could have access to a deep sea port, and the next option they couldn't cut across because they couldn't fill in the Everglades, so the next stop was Key West.
Key West, right.
So that's why he built that railroad.
So the giveaway is John Saxer found all these stone anchors, giant stone anchors, all across the west coast of Florida. He's numbered 2,000 of them, from Tallahassee to Naples, Florida, or maybe to Key West.
Anchors?
Stone anchors. So before you had the anchor, which is relatively new invention of that specifically shaped anchor. I believe that's only 200, 300 years old. I could be very wrong. It might be 500, but you get the idea. Back in ancient times, there was no anchor. You had a big rock with a hole drilled in through it. And these holes, now there's nothing special about these rocks, but the holes drilled through them are extraordinary. They all follow the same width as if they were machined, like a standardized bit that was drilling 17.5-inch holes, 14-inch and 17.5-inch holes through these giant 2,000-pound stone anchors that are just a solid limestone rock. And what they did with these, when they would find them, they would take them and put them in parks, put them in parking lots, put them in, and because they had no significance to the people that found them. Well, John Saxer, being an archaeologist, a Egyptologist, had seen them in the Mediterranean, and he knew they were stone anchors. The only problem is they're 10 times larger than any of the stone anchors found anywhere else in the world, except for the one at the base of Mount Ararat, which is where Noah landed his ark. They literally have Noah's anchor. And the Templars went there and etched symbols into the anchor.
I've seen that.
And that's at the base of Mount Ararat.
I've seen that.
Which is officially where Noah landed his ark. So what they're saying is Noah was just one of these ark ships, and that's the only stone that big found elsewhere in the world. Florida was the base, is what they're saying. And when the poles shifted, the flood came, whatever it was, the deluge, the grand cataclysm that rewrote America and the world, the globe. What happened was Florida was the home base from Tampa, and they had the inland Plato also says that Atlantis had a canal, man-made canal, that traced the entirety of the coastline. Nowhere in the Middle East has that. Nowhere in Eurasia has that. Nowhere in Africa has that. The only place where you'll see a landmass traced, well, the whole eastern coast of America has it, for one, but it's not as consistent. You know, like they say, I-95 goes all the way to, like, Massachusetts, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, the intercoastal goes all the way up to Maine, but it's incomplete, so blah, blah, blah. In Florida, you have almost this complete, preserved Indian boat highway, natural formation, whatever they want to say it is. It is a inland, track of water that is a barrier island, which is precisely the description that Plato gives of Atlantis. Number 2, you have all the stone anchors. Number 3, you have Persephone, and the myth of Garden of Eden comes from the myth of Persephone. Persephone's entrance into the underworld was through a crater. The Middle East does not get sinkholes very often, almost never. Florida, with its aquifer underneath, the river Styx flowing underneath the underworld, the underwater river, the underground river, is the Garden of Eden. Why? Because even in the Christian mythology, the Garden of Eden is situated right on top of hell, on top of the underworld. And you can see that in some of these old Christian paintings, where the devil, like, yes, there's a serpent on the tree, and the serpent's kind of the devil, but the devil will be underground, underneath the Garden of Eden. And you'll see that all the time.
What the fuck?
Now, why is that? That's because, and the whole story comes from Greek, where the snake on the tree is Ladon, the serpent from Greek mythology, Ladon. Adam is Atlas, and his wife is not Persephone.
I mean, it would make sense because the Atlas holds the world
Exactly.
on his back.
So that would be like the Bermuda Triangle. That's why Florida has no mountains, because it's been leveled for, magical
purposes. It's a Masonic tracing board, if you will, of the United States.
Exactly. It's like a checker. It's like a chessboard.
It's the last frontier, yeah.
But it is, they say that the Garden of Eden was flat. There was no hills. There was mountains outside. Who was the one
that, there was somebody who told me that, I heard a friend of mine say it on another podcast, but I asked him who told him that I don't think he told me that Florida's the best state for manifestation because of the water around it.
Yes. I mean,
who the fuck said that is my thing.
I'm not a manifester, but I would agree, because you have the water here and the spring of life. The fountain of youth was in the Garden of Eden, according to Christianity. Well, you also have the 4 rivers that fed Eden. In Tampa Bay area, you have 4 rivers. If you want to zoom out on Florida as a whole, you have 4 major rivers coming out of the main natural ports. St. John's.
Kissimmee.
I don't know them. The Kissimmee, the St. John's.
Yeah, and the funny thing is that they're all connected to the Everglades. They all flow into the Everglades. Like, Shingle Creek goes from Orlando all the way down to the Everglades, bro. It's fucking crazy.
Tolkien knew this too. The swamp is where the underworld crosses into the world.
Really?
And that's why you see like the Florida bog people. These cultures would come to Florida to bury people, certain people, because they know that the bodies get preserved there forever, because it's like the underworld. It's like
that
Florida's the threshold.
Tallahassee airport has headstones on it.
Headstones?
Yeah, there's people buried in the Tallahassee airport in the airfield.
Wow.
Isn't that crazy? By the fences, there's headstones.
Dang.
Wow.
It's trippy.
So, I like that idea. We need to get a hold of this Saxer guy, bro.
I've got a video coming out on John Saxer. It's gonna go talk in depth about a lot of this stuff. But
we need to get this guy on the podcast.
I'm trying. I don't know if he's alive. I've hit him up on YouTube, Instagram, emailed him. Haven't heard anything back. He should be like 70, 75.
All right, we gotta wrap it up. There's a lady.
Yeah, let's wrap this up.
Right.
So, yeah, here we are. We got people trying to come in.
We've got more to talk about.
Yeah, definitely, bro.
We're gonna do.
I'm telling you, bro, it's too much to not.
Thanks, Juan.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you guys for
Thanks,
coming.